My father told me to find somewhere else to die, right there in the hallway, in the house my mother paid for, 6 days after we buried her. He had already changed the locks, and my key did nothing. His new wife Shannon was measuring the master bedroom. Picking curtains like grief was a minor inconvenience. Brad kept saying I had no claim, and he told the insurance company he was the only beneficiary. He looked at me and said my mother could not protect me anymore, and he said it like a victory. He was right that she could not speak now, but he was wrong to think she had stayed silent. She had already spoken, in paperwork he never expected, and she had built a shield before she ever got sick. My name is Kayla Winters. I am 28 years old, and I live with lupus, so stress does not just hurt my feelings, it hurts my body. Let me take you back to last October, the night my mother died, and the day everything shifted. The hospital room smelled like sanitizer and dying flowers. A vase of carnations sat by the window, wilted and forgotten. I held my mother's hand, and it was so thin, I felt every bone. Evelyn Winters built a life from nothing, and she never stopped fighting. But pancreatic cancer took what strength she had left. The doctors gave her 14 months, and she used every day, planning and protecting, even when she could barely lift her head. Her eyes opened for one clear moment, and she told me the house was mine, and she told me not to let anyone take it. I squeezed her hand and tried to smile, thinking it was just fear speaking. Then the monitor beeped, and then it did not. Time turned strange, and I sat there counting breaths that never came back. My father arrived 2 hours later, and Shannon walked beside him, face smooth, eyes dry. Brad stood at the foot of the bed and said at least Evelyn was not suffering. Like that was the whole story. He still did not look at me. My hands were swollen, my knees locked, and I was in a flare so bad I had needed a wheelchair all week. The only person who ever made sure I could stand was gone. After the funeral for my mother, 83 people filled the chapel because Evelyn Winters mattered. She ran free tax workshops at the community center every spring, and she brought soup to new mothers on our block. My father, Brad Winters, stood at the podium and talked about himself with steady confidence. He said he lost his partner, his rock, his anchor. Then he said his grief was unbearable. He spoke for 6 minutes, and I counted like it was homework. He said the name of my mother 4 times, and he described his own pain 9 times. Shannon Winters stood in the front row, in black and gold, crying only when someone watched her. I sat near the side aisle in my wheelchair, because no one saved me a seat up front. Aunt Renee Carter held my hand, firm and warm, the way my mother always did. She whispered that something felt wrong about Shannon, and I could not argue. After the service, relatives lined up to hug my father, and Shannon accepted condolences like she was hosting a party. I wheeled myself toward the parking lot, and I saw Shannon step behind the chapel, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, but I heard enough. "It is done," she said. "We can start Monday." She turned, saw me, and smiled like nothing happened. She told me I should rest, because I looked exhausted. 3 days later, the house still smelled like lilies, wilted petals on every surface. Brad called me into the living room, and he sat in the green velvet armchair that belonged to my mother. Shannon perched on the armrest beside him, legs crossed, hand on his shoulder, like she was claiming a prize. Brad said we needed to talk about the house, the accounts, and the life insurance. He said it all came to him because he was the surviving spouse, and that was how the law worked. Shannon nodded and repeated it, sweet and confident. Then Brad slid a paper across the coffee table, and it was a quit claim deed. My name was typed at the bottom, ready for a signature. He told me to make it easy for everyone and to sign by Friday. I stared at the fresh ink, and I understood someone prepared this long before the funeral. Friday arrived, and I did not sign anything. Near midnight, my bedroom door opened without a knock, and hallway light cut across my bed. Brad Winters stood there holding an empty suitcase. Then he tossed it onto my blanket. He told me to pack, and he said it like a simple order. I sat up, and my joints burned with heat. The flare was getting worse, every movement like grinding glass. I told him the house belonged to my mother, and he answered that my mother was dead. He said he was the surviving spouse, so the house was his now. Shannon Winters leaned against the hallway wall, arms folded, watching with a small, satisfied smile. Brad stepped closer, voice low and steady, and told me to find somewhere else to die. He added that my mother was not here to protect me anymore, and my stomach dropped. I remembered him driving me to lupus appointments years ago, acting like a father. That memory did not match the man in my doorway. I packed what I could: clothes, medication, and the reading glasses my mother kept by her bed. I dragged the suitcase across the porch where she used to sit, and her wind chimes rang in the cold air. At 1 a.m, I called Aunt Renee Carter, and she answered on the first ring. She did not ask why. She just said she was coming. In her car, I could not cry. My body had no energy left. Renee held my hand on the center console and told me we would figure it out. At 3 a.m, I sat on the edge of her guest bed, staring at yellow curtains and a cedar quilt. I opened my bank app and saw $2,112. That was everything I had. The next morning, I called my pharmacy, and the automated system cut me off. It said my insurance had been terminated. It offered out-of-pocket payment, $14 for 1 month of prescriptions, hydroxychloroquine, prednisone, and the medications that kept my immune system from eating my body alive. Without them, the flares would worsen, and kidney damage would accelerate. My father did not just take my home. He cut off my ability to stay alive. I sat at Renee's kitchen table, staring at a mug I could not lift. My hands were too swollen to grip it, and my throat felt tight. Renee watched me. Then she spoke softly. She said my mother Evelyn told her something, about a year before the diagnosis. At Thanksgiving, in the kitchen, Evelyn grabbed her arm and spoke fast. "If anything happens to me, tell Kayla to call Monica Reed," she said. Renee reached into her purse and pulled out a folded napkin, old and creased, with a phone number written in blue ink. She said she never knew who Monica was, but Evelyn made her keep it. The handwriting was my mother's handwriting, neat and deliberate, even on a napkin. I stared at it, and anger rose under the grief. My mother did not do things without a reason, and she did not leave me unprotected. I set my alarm for 7 a.m, and I started calling as soon as I could. No answer at first, only voicemail, again and again. On the 4th try, a steady voice finally picked up. She answered, with the name of her law office, and I swallowed hard. I said my name, Kayla Winters, and I said my mother was Evelyn Winters. The voice changed, not louder, just closer. A pause, then she said she had been waiting for my call. My chest tightened, and I had to sit down. Attorney Monica Reed told me my mother came to her years ago, long before chemotherapy, long before Shannon ever moved into our life. Monica said my mother predicted this moment, and she prepared for it. She said she could not explain details over the phone, but she could see me tomorrow at 10 a.m. She told me to bring my identification and nothing else. Then her voice slowed, and she gave me one rule. Whatever I do, I must not sign anything my father gives me. She told me I must not tell him I called her. Before she hung up, she delivered a message my mother left behind. She said, "You are going to be okay." I sat on the kitchen floor with the phone against my chest, and I breathed, because for the first time since the funeral, I felt a path appear. The next morning, a courier brought a heavy envelope to Aunt Renee Carter house, cream paper, sharp edges, the kind meant to intimidate. It was from attorney Colin Mercer, representing Brad Winters, and it ordered me to stop claiming the house on Birchwood Lane. It gave me 10 calendar days to disappear. Then I read the second paragraph, and my vision blurred. Brad intended to ask a judge to declare me legally incapacitated because I had lupus, and he said that meant I could not manage money or decisions. My father was not only taking my home, he was coming for my right to fight back. Renee Reed over my shoulder, went silent, then grabbed her keys. She told me to get dressed because we had an appointment in less than 2 hours. She drove me to the pharmacy first, paid out of pocket $14 for 1 month of medication. She did not hesitate. She said Evelyn Winters would have done the same for her children. We arrived at attorney Monica Reed office early, on the second floor of a brick building downtown, quiet and plain, with a small brass nameplate by the door. While I waited, my phone rang, and it was Brad. I answered, because a part of me still hoped. He told me to sign the deed. He said I had nothing, no money, no insurance, no leverage. He said I had lupus, and that was all I had. I told him I would speak to a lawyer, and he laughed. Then asked what lawyer, and with what money. I ended the call, set my phone face down, and pressed my palms to my thighs until the shaking eased. The receptionist slid me a glass of water without a word, and Renee sat beside me, steady as a wall. She whispered that he did not know yet, and she was right. Attorney Monica Reed greeted me like she already knew my voice, calm, direct, and careful with my dignity. Her office was small, but warm. Shelves of worn legal books, and a framed photo behind her desk. 2 young women on a college lawn, laughing. One was Monica. The other was my mother, Evelyn Winters, with her whole life in front of her. Monica saw me looking and said it was taken in the mid-'80s, the year my mother decided she would never be powerless again. Then Monica opened a leather folder, thick at the corners, and told me what mattered. My father lawyer was claiming my mother died without a will, and that lie was the foundation of everything: the deed, the insurance claim, and the court threat. Monica tapped the folder and said he was wrong. Evelyn signed a formal will 3 years ago, long before the diagnosis, long before Shannon Winters moved in, and it was notarized by a retired judge. 2 independent witnesses signed, and my mother recorded a video statement, while healthy and clear-minded, confirming every instruction in her own voice. Monica said the will was airtight, and no competent attorney would want to challenge it. My chest loosened for the first time in weeks, and I started crying, not from fear, from relief. Monica pushed tissues toward me and waited, like time belonged to me. When I could breathe again, she told me there was also a handwritten letter my mother wanted read aloud, and she wanted the family to hear it together. Monica said she would send formal notice to Brad, to his attorney, and to key relatives. Everyone would be in the same room, and my mother's words would be heard. Before I left, Monica said there was one more step my mother took, but it would make the most sense at the reading. She told me I did not have to fight alone, because my mother already fought for me. All I had to do was show up. 2 days later, the notices went out by certified mail, return receipt requested, and my father received his on Tuesday morning. I did not see his face, but I heard his panic through Aunt Renee Carter's phone. He called her first, voice thinner than the one that threw a suitcase at me. He demanded to know who Monica Reed was, and why Evelyn never mentioned a lawyer. Renee told him to come to the reading and find out. Brad said there was no will, and his lawyer already confirmed it. Renee told him that if he was so sure, he had nothing to fear. She ended the call, and we sat at her kitchen table listening to the silence that followed. That evening Brad called me, and the tone had changed again. The cold authority was gone, replaced by careful sweetness he had not used since I was a teenager. He said we could work something out, that I did not need a lawyer, that family should handle family business. I told him I would be at the reading, and I ended the call before he could bargain. Shannon Winters posted to the family social group that night a verse about betrayal and a caption implying she was the victim. Relatives reacted with hearts and praying hands aimed at them, not at me. I did not respond. I did not even open the application. Brad spent the next week calling everyone: Uncle Jason Carter, Uncle Owen Carter, cousins I barely knew, telling them I was grieving and unstable. He hinted that my illness made me confused, and that he was trying to help. Renee fielded the calls while I wrote a timeline for Monica, dates, conversations, insurance changes, and every detail that proved intent. Monica called with an update and said Brad hired a second attorney, a specialist in estate disputes. She said he was panicking, and she sounded almost satisfied. The countdown to the reading began, and for the first night in weeks, I slept without waking up. The morning of the reading, I stood in Aunt Renee Carter's bathroom and stared at my own face. The lupus flare was still active. My fingers were puffy, my wrists stiff, and nothing about me looked ready for a fight. Renee loaned me a dark blazer, and she told me to dress like I belonged, because I did. She drove us downtown in silence. No radio, just wet tires on asphalt, and the steady click of the turn signal. Our Monica Reed office sat above a small brick building, second floor, no elevator, and I climbed each step slowly. Inside, a long oak table filled the conference room, with 12 chairs and water pitchers at both ends. Uncle Jason Carter was already there. My mother's younger brother, beard untrimmed, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. Uncle Owen Carter sat farther down, quiet, watching the window like he wished he could disappear. Natalie Park, the family accountant, had a legal pad open, glasses hanging on a chain, and she nodded at me without smiling. 2 assistants from Monica firm sat near the door, calm and unreadable. Then my father Brad Winters walked in, wearing a navy suit and a fresh haircut, like he was going to a ceremony, not a reckoning. Shannon Winters followed a step behind, in a black dress, tissue already in her hand, ready to perform. Behind them came attorney Colin Mercer, thin and sharp, briefcase held like a shield, and attorney Stephen Barrett, shorter, sweating lightly, eyes darting around the room. Brad sat on one side of the table, and I sat on the other, 8 feet apart, and it felt like a canyon. Shannon did not look at me. She looked at the chair at the head of the table, as if she expected it to belong to her. Monica entered last, carrying a leather folder in one hand and a laptop under the other arm. She did not smile, and she did not need to. Colin stood immediately, buttoned his jacket, and spoke like he was addressing a jury. He said his client was unaware of any valid will, and he questioned the authenticity of anything produced today. He sat back down, satisfied with his own theater. Monica opened the leather folder, adjusted her reading glasses, and said one simple sentence. "Let us begin." Monica let the silence stretch, so everyone could feel what Brad Winters had implied. Then she began reading, calm and precise, like a surgeon before the first cut. She read the formal opening, that Evelyn Winters was of sound mind, and that this was her last will, revoking any prior versions. She moved through standard clauses, executor language, compliance statements, and no one interrupted. My father watched her hands, waiting for a mistake he could grab. Shannon dabbed her eyes, but the tears never landed. Then Monica reached the first bequest, and the room changed temperature. She read my name, Kayla Winters, and my father sat forward, like the air pulled him. Monica said the residence on Birchwood Lane was held in the Evelyn Winters Revocable Living Trust, established years earlier, with me as the sole beneficiary upon her death. Brad's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, and no sound came out. He said his name was on the deed. He signed. He knew what he owned. Monica looked up and corrected him, steady and firm. She said the home was purchased with Evelyn's separate funds, and it remained separate property, and the trust simply made that unbreakable. The color drained from Brad's face in one violent moment, like someone pulled a plug. Monica turned a page and said the house was only the beginning. She read the life insurance policy, valued at $2,100,000, and she stated the beneficiary as Kayla Winters, confirmed by the insurer. Colin Mercer stopped writing, then started again, faster. Stephen Barrett leaned toward my father, whispering, and Brad stared straight ahead, blinking hard. Monica continued to the investment accounts, listing a portfolio valued around $4,200,000, held inside the trust, again naming me as the sole beneficiary. Uncle Jason made a small sound in his throat, half shock, half relief. Natalie Park stopped taking notes, as if the numbers no longer needed recording. Shannon's hand froze mid-dab, tissue suspended near her cheek. Brad turned to his lawyers, searching for rescue, and neither of them gave it. Colin whispered that they could not contest this, not with proper notarization, independent witnesses, and supporting evidence. Brad asked one word, almost broken. Evidence. Monica touched the laptop beside her folder and said she had exactly what Evelyn wanted us all to hear. Monica turned the laptop so the screen faced the center of the table. She said Evelyn recorded a video statement to accompany the will, and Evelyn asked that it be played in full. Monica pressed play, and there she was, my mother, sitting in the living room on Birchwood Lane, in the green velvet armchair. The late afternoon light hit the wall behind her, soft and warm, and she looked healthy, steady, fully herself. She wore the blue cardigan I gave her for Christmas, the year before everything fell apart. She looked straight into the camera, and she spoke with the voice I remembered from childhood. She said if we were watching, then she was gone, and she guessed Brad was in the room, angry. My father flinched, just slightly, like she tapped his shoulder from a place he could not reach. Then my mother spoke to me, not with pity, but with strength. She said I was never a burden, and my lupus did not define me, my heart. Aunt Renee Carter grabbed my hand under the table, and I felt her fingers squeeze, steady and protective. My mother said she placed everything in my name because she trusted me, and because she knew what happens when grief meets grief. She said she hoped Brad would prove her wrong, and she sounded genuinely sad that she had to say it. Uncle Jason wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Uncle Owen bowed his head, silent. Natalie Park did not write a single word. She just watched. Brad stared at the screen with his jaw locked, hands flat on the table, trapped by a truth he could not interrupt. Shannon's eyes flicked toward the door, like she was planning an exit. Then my mother paused, took a breath, and said there was one more thing she needed to say about Shannon. The room went so quiet, I could hear the building air vent hum. Monica did not move. She let the video speak. And I realized my mother was not done protecting me, not even from the grave. When the screen went dark, Brad Winters finally moved in his chair. He pushed it back, and his hands shook against the table. He said the video was manipulation, and he called my mother spiteful. Irony. Colin Mercer stood, ready to argue, ready to perform for control. Attorney Monica Reed raised one hand and stopped him cold. Monica said the recording was dated, witnessed, and linked to notarized papers. She said it would be admissible, and it would be damaging in court. Colin asked for a recess, and Monica said there was nothing to negotiate. She slid a packet across the table, thick and neatly stapled. It demanded keys returned, contact stopped, and harassment ended immediately. She said the trust owned the home, and it would take possession now. Brad glanced at Shannon Winters, and Shannon looked away without blinking. Attorney Stephen Barrett leaned in and whispered about costs and failure. Brad muttered about appealing, and Monica stayed calm and exact. She said contesting would forfeit the cash bequest and trigger fee recovery. She also said fraud referrals were possible if insurance claims were false. Natalie Park confirmed beneficiary records and said the insurer already acknowledged me. Uncle Jason Carter asked how soon I could return home, and Monica said today. Shannon stood up fast, face red, tissue crushed in her fist. She said none of this was fair, and she blamed me for everything. Monica told her fairness was not the issue. Legality was the issue. Shannon grabbed her handbag and walked out, heels hard on the floor. Brad stared at the door, then stared at me and looked afraid. Not afraid of love, afraid of consequences, afraid of losing control. Monica ended the meeting with one rule: no new signatures, ever. She said, nobody contacts Kayla Winters without counsel and witnesses. Then she said we go to the house next, calmly and together. The video continued, and my mother did not soften a single word. She said Brad Winters and Shannon Winters began their relationship before her diagnosis. She said it started before the funeral flowers were even ordered. She said she saw late-night calls, and she saw secret messages. She said she noticed Shannon watching the house, like it was inventory. My mother admitted she stayed quiet for a reason, not weakness. She needed time, she needed leverage, and she needed a plan. She said she did not build the trust to punish anyone. She built it to protect. She looked into the camera, steady and clear, and spoke to me. Kayla Winters, you keep your medical care, and you keep your home. You keep your dignity, even if they try to take it. She said Lupus already demanded enough, and she refused to add greed. Then she turned to Brad, and her voice went colder. She said if he cut my insurance, or forced my signature, she was ready. She said she documented account changes, and she kept copies of every threat. She said he would not win by wearing a grieving husband mask. Uncle Jason Carter made a small sound and covered his mouth fast. Uncle Owen Carter stared at the table, eyes wet, shoulders rigid. Shannon shifted in her chair, and her lips pressed into a thin line. My mother explained why she told Aunt Renee Carter to guard a number. She said she knew the day would come, and she prepared for it. She said love is proven, when no one is watching, and when money appears. Then she delivered her final instruction. Simple and sharp and legal. Brad received a small cash bequest, only if he did not contest. If he contested, he would lose that money, and the trust would pursue costs. She ended by asking one thing: do not let my daughter be erased. Attorney Monica Reed paused the video at the end, and nobody spoke. We drove to Birchwood Lane in 2 cars, in steady afternoon light. Aunt Renee Carter drove me, and Attorney Monica Reed followed behind us. My stomach felt like a knot of wire, tight and restless. When we pulled into the driveway, the curtains were wide open. Music played inside, loud enough to feel like an insult. Shannon Winters had been living there, like my mother never existed. Monica asked me to stay in the car for a minute. She walked to the front door with Natalie Park beside her. A process server followed them, papers held flat in his hand. Brad Winters opened the door, and his face hardened immediately. Monica said the trust was taking possession, and she requested the keys. Brad argued that he was the husband, and Monica said he was not owner. Shannon appeared behind him and laughed once, sharp and fake. She said I was sick, and I could not manage a house. Monica said illness is not incapacity, and greed is not guardianship. Shannon tried to close the door, and the process server stepped forward. He served Brad the notice, then served Shannon a demand to vacate. Brad looked like he might explode. Then he deflated in place. He handed over a ring of keys, metal clinking in the quiet. Monica turned and told me to come inside now. I stepped over the threshold slowly, knees stiff, hands swollen. The living room was rearranged, and my mother's photos were missing. A new throw blanket sat where her quilt used to be. Rage rose in my chest, hot and fast, then settled into focus. I walked to the mantel and saw a small frame hidden behind a candle. My mother's smile was half covered by dust, and it broke me. I wiped the glass with my thumb and held it like a promise. Shannon started opening drawers, claiming items as hers, loud and frantic. Monica stopped her and said everything would be inventoried. She said, "Trust property stays, and personal items are documented." Brad stood in the doorway, watching me, silent and tight-jawed. He did not apologize, and he did not meet my eyes. I took one deep breath, then spoke one sentence. "This is my home. I am staying, and I am done being pushed out." Attorney Monica Reed told everyone to slow down and treat the house like evidence. Shannon Winters was still trying to grab drawers and claim items as hers. Monica asked Natalie Park to start an inventory, room by room, and to note anything missing. Brad Winters paced near the hallway, jaw tight, eyes hard, acting like anger was ownership. I walked through the living room carefully, joints stiff, breathing shallow, and I noticed what Shannon removed first. My mother photos were gone from the walls, and the quilt she sewed was missing too. I opened the hall closet and found empty hooks, where my mother coat always hung. Aunt Renee Carter stood behind me, steady, and she whispered that Shannon moved fast for someone who was grieving. Monica asked Brad for the garage code, and he refused, until Monica reminded him the trust owned the property. He gave the code, and the door lifted with a slow rattle. Inside, boxes were stacked like a rushed exit plan. Natalie found a plastic bin, labeled donations, and inside were my mother journals, medical binders, and a folder marked taxes. My stomach twisted, because that bin was not trash, it was history. Monica lifted the folder, checked the contents, then said quietly that Evelyn Winters left a trail on purpose. Under the tax papers was a sealed envelope addressed to Kayla Winters, with my name written in my mother handwriting. Monica handed it to me, and told me to open it when I felt ready. I opened it anyway, because waiting had never protected me. Inside was a single page, and a list of items Shannon was not allowed to touch. Family jewelry, the trust binder, the insurance confirmations, and a small lockbox, hidden behind the pantry wall. My hands started shaking, but I kept reading. At the bottom, my mother wrote one instruction. Simple and sharp. Do not let them make you sign, and do not let them make you small. Monica found the lockbox within minutes, because my mother described the exact shelf and screw. Inside was a flash drive, a copy of the will, and printed screenshots of account changes, timed to days when my mother was in treatment. Brad saw the papers, and his face went pale in a way anger could not hide. Shannon started yelling from the kitchen, saying this was theft, saying I was sick and confused. Monica turned toward her, voice flat and final, and said sickness is not confusion, and lying is not love. 2 mornings later, Monica called me before sunrise and told me Brad Winters filed for emergency guardianship. He was still trying to label me incapacitated, using lupus like a weapon. His attorney Colin Mercer claimed I could not manage finances, and that I was vulnerable to influence. Monica said the filing was sloppy and desperate, but we had to answer fast. Aunt Renee Carter drove me to the courthouse, with my medication in my purse, and my mother's letter folded in my pocket. I sat in a hard wooden bench, knees aching, hands swollen, and I watched my father walk in like he was the victim. Shannon Winters followed him, eyes shiny, mouth tight, playing the role she practiced. Attorney Stephen Barrett carried their documents and kept whispering into Brad's ear. Monica arrived with a binder, thick enough to look like a doorstop. Natalie Park sat behind us with ledgers and a timeline of every account move. Monica handed the clerk medical letters from my rheumatologist, stating clearly that lupus does not remove mental capacity. She also handed the judge the video transcript, the will witnesses, and the trust documents, all dated and notarized. When the judge asked Brad why he canceled my insurance, Brad tried to say it was an administrative mistake. Monica placed the insurer record on the table, and it showed a direct request from his account. The judge asked why Brad changed locks before any estate process, and Brad said he feared I would damage the property. Monica presented photographs of the house after Shannon moved in. Furniture moved, photos removed, and items boxed for donation. The judge looked at Shannon and asked if she removed property belonging to the trust. Shannon tried to cry, then stopped when it did not work. The judge denied the guardianship request and warned Brad to stop using illness as a legal shortcut. The judge also ordered no direct contact with me, except through counsel, and required immediate return of any property removed. My father stared at the floor, and for the first time he looked small. When we walked out, Renee held my elbow, and Monica told me I did not just win a hearing. She said I reclaimed my voice, on record, where lies cannot breathe. That afternoon, Monica sat with me at the kitchen table on Birchwood Lane, and she built my next steps like a plan, not a wish. She helped me set up new health coverage, and she used trust funds legally, so no one could trap me again. Natalie Park created a budget for medication, therapy, and home repairs, because stability is a medical need too. Aunt Renee Carter stocked the refrigerator and labeled containers like I was recovering from surgery. I moved slowly through the house, touching familiar corners and letting my body believe it was safe. In my mother bedroom, Shannon had replaced the bedding with something glossy and unfamiliar. I removed it, folded it neatly, and set it in the garage for inventory. Then I found my mother quilt in a box, creased and dusty, and I held it against my chest until my breathing calmed. Brad Winters tried to call me twice. Then he sent an email through his attorney, asking to talk. Monica replied for me, firm and clean, and reminded him of the no-contact order. Shannon disappeared for 3 days, then showed up with her own lawyer, demanding personal items. Monica allowed a supervised pickup, with a list and witnesses, and Shannon hated that she could not take what was not hers. I focused on my body, because lupus punishes chaos. I took my prescriptions on time. I attended follow-up visits, and I slept without waking to panic. Uncle Jason Carter stopped by one evening with a bag of groceries and an apology he struggled to form. Uncle Owen Carter mailed me a small photo album, my mother handwriting on the cover, and a note that said he should have protected me sooner. I did not forgive everyone, and I did not need to. I set boundaries like locks, and I kept them. The house was mine, my care was mine, and my mother planned it exactly what she promised. It kept me alive, and it kept me standing. The week after court, attorney Monica Reed moved fast, and she made it impossible to stall. She filed a formal demand for every item removed from Birchwood Lane, and she attached the inventory Natalie Park created, line by line, room by room. Brad Winters tried to claim confusion, and he tried to say Shannon Winters packed things by mistake. Monica answered that mistakes do not happen in labeled boxes. At midnight, with the locks changed. 2 days later, a supervised return was scheduled, with witnesses, cameras, and a clear list. Shannon arrived wearing sunglasses, even though the sky was cloudy, and she carried herself like she still believed she could intimidate me. She walked through my mother's house, pointing at objects, saying hers, mine, ours, like ownership was a mood. Monica stopped her each time, calm and exact, and asked for proof, receipts, dates, and documentation. Shannon had none, only attitude. Natalie checked serial numbers on electronics and matched them to Evelyn Winters' purchase record. Aunt Renee Carter opened a box Shannon called trash, and inside was my mother's wedding album, pressed under towels like it did not matter. My throat tightened, and I held it carefully. Because some things are not property, they are history. Brad stood in the driveway, arms crossed, watching, and he did not speak. At one point, Shannon tried to step into my bedroom, and Monica told her no, and said the trust did not allow wandering. Shannon snapped that I was sick, and I could not handle adult life. Monica responded that illness is not incompetence, and cruelty is not concern. The supervised return ended with Shannon leaving empty-handed, except for the items she could prove were hers. When the cars pulled away, I stood in the quiet house and felt something settle. They could move furniture, they could hide photos, they could box up memories, but they could not steal my mother's intention. She planned for this, and her plan was working, in daylight with witnesses. Attorney Colin Mercer requested a settlement meeting, and Monica agreed, because delaying would only feed more chaos. We met in a small conference room, neutral and cold, with water bottles no one touched. Brad Winters arrived first, alone this time, and he looked tired in a way anger could not fix. Colin opened with a speech about closure, about family, about grief. Monica let him finish, then asked one question. What exactly are you asking for? Brad said he wanted time, and he wanted money, and he wanted the house to stay under his control until he figured things out. Monica said no to every piece of it, with the same steady tone. She reminded him that the trust owned the home, and that the court already denied his guardianship attempt. She reminded him that his small cash bequest depended on one condition: he does not contest. Colin tried to argue that Brad deserved compensation for being a spouse, and Monica answered with facts, separate funds, trust language, notarization, and video evidence. Brad, shifted in his chair, then tried a different approach. He said I should give him something, because he was my father. I told him I was not bargaining for basic decency anymore. I told him he threw a suitcase at me and told me to die somewhere else. I told him he canceled my insurance while I was in a flare, and that is not parenting. The room went quiet, and even Colin looked uncomfortable. Monica offered Brad a clean exit instead. He signs a non-harassment agreement, returns remaining items, and stays away from me and the property. In exchange, she would not pursue additional claims unless new misconduct appeared. Brad stared at the table, then nodded slowly, like he finally understood there was no path back to control. He signed, and his pen scratched loudly in the silence. When we left, Monica told me that boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are a safety rail, and I had earned the right to install one. With the legal pressure easing, my body finally began to unclench. Lupus does not forgive chaos, but it responds to safety, and I could feel the difference in small ways. I slept 6 hours without jolting awake. I ate breakfast without nausea. I took my medication on schedule without panic in my chest. Natalie Park helped me set up automatic payments for care, and Monica made sure every dollar used was properly documented, so no one could twist it later. Aunt Renee Carter visited every other day, not to take over, but to keep me steady. She reminded me to drink water, to rest, to keep my appointments, and to stop apologizing for needing help. Uncle Owen Carter called one evening, voice quiet, and said he should have spoken up sooner. I did not rush to comfort him. I just said I heard him, and that was enough. Uncle Jason Carter dropped off groceries again, then lingered by the door like he wanted to say more. He admitted Brad had been pressuring relatives for months, planting the idea that I was unstable. Hearing it confirmed what I already felt. They were building a narrative to erase me. That night, I walked through the living room, and I put my mother's photos back on the mantel. I returned her quilt to the couch, folded the way she liked, edges aligned. I found a small list in her handwriting, tucked inside a cookbook, reminders to rotate pantry items, to call the plumber, to pay the gardener. Ordinary life instructions, written by someone who knew love lives in details. I sat on the floor with that list in my hands, and I realized my mother did not only leave me money. She left me a future, mapped out in ink and defended in court. And I decided I would live it, without fear, and without asking permission. After the house finally went quiet, I went upstairs alone, moving slow, resting between steps. I walked into my mother's bedroom, and the curtains were open, angled toward the garden. On the nightstand beside her bed sat something I did not expect. A leather-bound journal, closed, heavy, and familiar. On the first page was the handwriting of my mother, neat and steady. I opened it, and my breath caught. Page after page, letters written to me, dated across 14 months, the full stretch of her illness. Some entries were long, some were only a few lines, but everyone felt like her hand on my shoulder. She wrote about the weather, about a red cardinal that visited the feeder each morning. She wrote about hearing me sleep through the wall, and how that sound calmed her. She wrote about pain days, and how she learned to measure strength differently. She wrote about the day her hair started falling out, and how she still made coffee, because routine kept fear from swallowing her. She wrote about Aunt Renee Carter, and how Renee would be my safe place if she could not be here. She wrote about Brad Winters too, without cruelty, only clarity. She wrote that some people love comfort more than they love truth. She wrote that I must never sign anything in panic, and I must never mistake guilt for loyalty. The last entry was dated 1 week before she died. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, but unmistakably hers. She wrote that I was going to be okay, and she wrote that she made sure of it. I sat on her bed, held the journal against my chest, and cried. Not from anger, not from relief, not even from grief alone. I cried from the overwhelming fact that I was loved by someone who planned for a future she would never see. Outside the open window, the wind chimes on the porch sang softly, and for the first time in months, my lungs filled all the way. Here is what happened after the reading, once the room went quiet. Brad Winters moved to Columbus, Ohio, and stayed with his older brother, Gary, in a 2-bedroom apartment. He had $50,000, and after legal fees, about $12,000, he had $38,000 left. No house, no investments, no wife. Shannon Winters left the same day, and she did not come back, not to the house, and not to his calls. She filed for separation, changed her number, and vanished. I learned later, through attorney Monica Reed, that Shannon tried to petition for custody of her 2 children from her first marriage. Her case depended on showing financial stability, and without Brad money, it collapsed. The petition was denied. People found out anyway, not because I posted, and not because I called anyone. Uncle Jason Carter told one person, and the truth spread on its own. A week after the deadline passed, Monica sent me a final letter, short and professional, with one line in her own handwriting. Evelyn would be proud, and so am I. The first thing I did with my mother's gift was keep myself alive. I enrolled in comprehensive health insurance, the kind that covers rheumatology, lab work, prescriptions, and emergency visits that lupus sometimes demands at 2 a.m. I had gone without insurance for 5 weeks, and those weeks cost more fear than I can explain. My doctor ran a full panel, looked at the results, and said my labs were better than they had been in 2 years. Then he said, "Stress kills, and peace heals." I started working again, part-time, 3 days a week, at a community outreach center. I helped women navigate financial abuse inside families, and I helped them find lawyers and clear next steps. Lupus still had days when I could not get out of bed, but now I could rest without panic. Aunt Renee Carter came every Saturday, with soup and steady comfort. I sat down with Monica too, and set up a trust of my own, because my mother taught me what preparation looks like, and what love looks like when it thinks ahead. Months later, a letter arrived, handwritten, postmarked Columbus, Ohio. I recognized the handwriting before I opened it, tight and slanted, the same hand that signed my permission slips in elementary school. He wrote that he made mistakes, that he knew it now. He wrote that he missed my mother, and he missed me, and asked if we could talk. I sat with that letter for a long time, on the porch, in my mother's chair, the wind chimes turning slow circles above my head. I expected anger, the way you expect thunder after lightning. But it did not come. What came instead was something quieter, a clear understanding that some doors need to stay closed, not out of hatred, but out of honesty. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out cream stationery my mother kept in the hallway drawer. I wrote that I did not hate him, but I could not trust him. I wrote that I would not pretend, just to make him feel better. I wrote that if he was serious about changing, he needed to start with himself, not with me. I wished him well, and I told him my door was not open right now, maybe one day, but not today. I folded the letter, sealed the envelope, wrote his address, and walked it to the mailbox. I did not slam the door forever, and I did not make a dramatic vow about never speaking again. That would be another kind of cruelty, and I have had enough cruelty for one lifetime. But I did not open the door out of guilt either, or loneliness, or because someone told me I should. If that door opens again, it will be because I am ready, not because I am pressured. I went back to the porch, listened to the wind chimes, the way I used to listen to my mother humming in the kitchen. I am telling you this because somewhere, someone is listening at 2 a.m, and their chest feels tight, and they think they have nowhere left to go. I kept the house quiet for a while, not empty, just calm. I repainted the hallway the color my mother liked, soft and warm, and I put her photos back where they belonged. I replaced the locks again, not because I feared my father, but because I respected myself. Attorney Monica Reed helped me close every open legal door, and Natalie Park helped me set guardrails so no one could weaponize money again. My lupus still flared, but it stopped feeling like a punishment because I could rest without panic. Aunt Renee Carter came by with soup and a checklist, not to control me, but to keep me steady. Uncle Owen Carter visited once, quiet and awkward, and he apologized without trying to be forgiven. Uncle Jason Carter admitted he let Brad Winters spin lies for months, and he said he was ashamed. I told them both the same thing: truth matters, but so does what you do next. I started therapy because grief does not end, it changes shape. I joined a local support group for autoimmune patients, and for the first time, I was not explaining myself. I also started volunteering at a community clinic, helping people who were being pushed around by relatives, by paperwork, by fear. I recognized the signs fast: the rushed signature, the sweet pressure, the sudden threats. When people asked how I stayed calm, I told them the truth. I was not calm, I was prepared. My mother prepared me, and I learned to prepare myself. And if you are listening with that tight feeling in your chest, I need you to hear this clearly. You do not have to accept cruelty just because it comes from family. You do not have to sign away your life to keep peace. Peace that costs your safety is not peace at all. On the first anniversary of my mother's death, I went to the cemetery with Aunt Renee Carter early in the morning when the grass still held dew. I brought fresh flowers, and I brought the leather journal she left behind, because it felt right to carry her words with me. I sat by the headstone and read one page, the page where she wrote that love is planning, not pleading. My phone buzzed while I was there, and the name on the screen made my stomach tighten: Brad Winters. I did not answer. 10 minutes later, he texted that he was nearby, and he wanted to talk, just for a minute. I stared at the message, then I looked at the stone, and I felt something settle into place. I was not that frightened girl in the hallway anymore. I wrote back one sentence: "You can email Monica Reed." Then I turned my phone off. Renee did not ask questions. She just sat beside me, and we listened to the wind move through the trees. Later that day, back at Birchwood Lane, I cooked one simple meal, and I ate it at the kitchen table where my mother used to sort mail. I opened a new notebook, and I wrote 3 goals: steady health, steady home, steady boundaries. I did not promise myself a perfect life. I promised myself a protected one. My father chose his path, and Shannon Winters chose hers, and I stopped trying to rescue either of them. I chose the path my mother carved with documents, with foresight, and with courage. I chose to live fully, even with lupus, even with grief, even with a family that tried to erase me. And if you take anything from my story, take this: the moment you stop begging for respect is the moment your life becomes yours again.